Everybody, welcome back. This is Jeff Jones, and with me again is my buddy Jack. And we're here to talk about episode 2 and kind of give a recap and review of episode 2 of American Nightmare. So, um, this episode is called Gone Girl, and so in the last part of episode 1, they kind of introduced the idea that Gone Girl was a movie that was released about a year before this kidnapping, and Gone Girl had Ben Affleck in it. It was kind of a big deal, kind of a big movie, and it was about a woman who faked her own disappearance to try to frame her husband for murder, which is pretty crazy. It's a pretty good movie anyway. If you haven't seen it, I recommend checking it out. You might find it interesting. Lots of twists and turns in that one too. But at this point in the case, from law enforcement and the media, the case had been kind of dubbed the Gone Girl case. So, what were your impressions, of episode 2, or any kind of opening statements you want to make about Gone Girl, or anything else?
Well, I got to be honest. I never watched Gone Girl. I mean, I've seen the trailer and heard about it, but I thought that was kind of a stretch. As it was that was my initial thoughts. It just didn't sound right. But I guess I can see media trying to run their cash register to drum up, make the story explode and get people bought into it. I could see them doing that for those purposes, but there was a lot. There was more to it. I'm not sure how much they knew at the time, really, despite what they may have said publicly. Kind of disproving that this was that, but nonetheless, they did blow it up using this Gone Girl movie as a backdrop. But episode 2. We're going to begin to find out a lot more detail in this case.
Yeah, I think the things really start to unfold in episode 2. And again, this is only a 3-part documentary, so
yeah,
it's kind of nice that it was pretty easy. You could binge this one pretty quickly, and I'm sure that they probably could have stretched it out to more. But in the age where everything is a 10-part, 12-part series, I kind of like that it was just a 3-part miniseries.
Yeah, I think they probably could have added at least one more episode with probably some really good factual detail. But 3-part, it was bang bang done. I binged it when I watched it.
Absolutely, I just watched it back to back to back. So the movie Gone Girl, like how I think I mentioned this in the previous summary that we talked about, Jack, and that is, every case is different. If we start attaching a preconceived notion about this case is just like this case, we're already following like a false premise, and I think it blurs our ideas of what what we should be looking for. Oh well, and then we compare things, and I know that that's kind of natural. It's kind of like, oh, because that's how our brains work. We kind of create patterns and we find similarities. But I don't think law enforcement should ever do that. I don't think law enforcement should ever be like, oh, this is just like the movie, like just like the movie. Are you kidding me? You watched
and they
too much.
did it, and they stuck with it, and so that to me makes. And I think we've talked about this too before. I understand that the police, they deal with certain. I'm sure there's probably several people, small, medium, even certainly the large police departments, they deal with certain individuals, and it's the same crap over and over and over. But then when you get into something like this, I mean, this kid Aaron, he never had any trouble at all, ever. He's a good guy. That was a real tell for me, when they revealed that this is just a normal guy, actually a good kid. Never had any trouble with him ever, legally, nothing. And then all of a sudden,
that he, had some trouble in his relationships, which I think makes him even more regular in a way. You know what I mean? Everybody does.
Sure, that's right. Yeah. There's nothing really unusual about that. but to take in, this detective, this department, that creates what I see as a mindset by this police department. Again, they tunnel visioned this whole case and stuck with it, and that was really telling to me. And we'll get far more into this in episode 2.
Yeah, so let's summarize episode 2 a little bit. I think
Sure.
okay, episode opens, and you can fill in the parts that I miss as I go, Jack. But the episode kind of opens with Denise actually being interviewed,
Yep.
and she says what happens to her, explains about the kidnapping and the way that it happened with the swimming goggles and that she was sedated. Uh, she tried not to panic. She feared that she would be raped and tortured. And so the fear was real for her. Absolutely. Um, so when she remembers being taken and driven away in a car, in the daylight now they're in the daylight. She says that she kind of tried to find her surroundings a little bit, that she could smell pine trees, and
Yeah.
that there was no like street noise, and it was pretty quiet. And it appeared to be somewhere in the woods. And the attacker grabbed her, dragged her inside. And he again says to Denise that, this was actually meant for Aaron's ex, Andrea, not you. And which is what he mentioned in episode 1. It came out that he said that to Aaron as well, that this was all about Andrea. And so, that's where I start to think, well, and they do talk a little bit about Andrea, but for the most part, the documentary doesn't unpack a lot about Andrea.
No, she's
We
brought in for. I think she's brought in for. I know she's brought in for one interview. I can't remember if they interviewed her twice, but she's definitely interviewed once.
That's right.
And I'm, yeah, yeah.
Well, we get to a little bit more about her later, but so we're back
Well,
to where
it is interesting. It is interesting that somehow this kidnapper knows about this relationship, and I don't remember if that's. Oh, never. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's ever revealed how that kidnapper knew this
knew so much
information.
about them. Yeah.
That's right. That's really strange, and so that it, it's like he had some kind of inside connection, or somehow they gleaned this information about them. So I don't know. Make what you will of it.
Yeah. I mean, so at that point in the story, Denise claims that the kidnapper told her, well, I'm part of a black market company that kidnaps people for money.
Yeah.
And then he told her that she's going to be released in about 48 hours. So it's just, I mean, there's just so many weird things. Like usually you wait until you get the money and then you release them. You don't, just like as we mentioned earlier in the past episode, like you don't kidnap someone traditionally and then just release them in 48 hours, whether you've gotten a payout or not.
No.
Just so weird.
Typically those kind of things, the kidnapped person ends up dead, and they put the body somewhere to be found, and that's it. Case closed.
And then Denise continues telling us a story about how she could hear like what she thought was French pop music. And I think I remember her saying that she's like, I kind of liked the music, which is a weird thing to be like, I'm kidnapped, but I kind of like this guy's taste in music.
Yep, that is weird.
That was a very weird, like comic relief point. And then it's revealed to her that, this kidnapper has insomnia and maybe PTSD from being in the military. So that's when we first get our kind of first main details about the kidnapper, that it's possible or likely that he was in the military and that he suffers from PTSD. And so.
And that he would share it with her.
Right.
Personal information, man.
It is. It's strange. Well, she did share with him previously that she was assaulted as a kid. to try to soften him up. She
Yeah.
said that, like, I said that I wanted him to, like, know that I was assaulted and that I have trauma from that, so you wouldn't assault me again.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe she's sharing, and then now he's sharing, or he's not as professional as it's said to be seen. So, um, at that point, he's telling her, like, we got a problem. I haven't gotten any money, and and then he says that, I need some sort of proof or collateral that you're not going to go to the police.
Yep.
And he says that one person of the group is going to have sex with her, and it's going to be recorded, so it looks like this was all set up and that she was actually kidnapped and sleeping with a man, and this was all part of her plan. So that's kind of how that's broached. I don't know if she had ever said that she heard more than one person talking. I don't know if you remember that, Jack.
I do remember, and I can't. Yeah, it was in episode 2. I'm sure it was that he told her that they were his partners, I guess, were coming, and she, of course, was in that room. But she could hear others in the other room, loud voices, but she couldn't tell exactly what they were saying because he still had the music going. But there were other voices in that other room. She heard the car pull up, and she heard it leave too.
Okay. So at that point, she says that the kidnapper says somebody's going to have sex with her, and they're going to record it. And at that point, she's raped. She's assaulted because she's not doing it at her own will.
Yep.
So afterwards, he took her into the bathroom, and she was allowed to take the goggles off. And she says she felt detached. And then she took a shower and cleaned up. And in the morning, this kidnapper again comes to Denise's room and says he's lost contact with Aaron, and claims that the other people in the party are going to come back, and he's warned her not to engage with them. And then a car pulls up. Oh yeah, so that's the part where the car pulls up. You're right, Jack.
That's right.
Now we know that there is more than one person involved in this crime.
As we learn more about this case and the law enforcement people that are involved, keep this incident in mind of who pulled up, who may have been there, and come to see this kidnapper. I have a suspicion, but I can't prove it. Anyway, continue.
So at that point, he said he needed to record a proof of life message and told her to say her name. And this message was played, I think, in the previous episode. And we hear her. This is the point where we hear the message, and that she records it. And then he said that he needed to record them having sex again, because the first time it didn't seem consensual, like they were having an affair. So he taped her eyes shut and raped her again, which I don't know how that's going to seem consensual, but there you go. So at this point, I'm thinking, is this just some ruse just to rape this woman? And it seems so strange, because is this about money? Or isn't it about money? Right? It doesn't seem like it's about money anymore. It seems like it's something about something else.
That's right.
Because again, this is all about Andrea. Well, if it was about then why are you? So there's just so many spins in this one. So then we go into a little bit more about her ordeal, and then he comes to her door in the middle of the night, and he says he wants to show her something. He showed her a video of her father talking to the media. That's when she kind of like had an episode and commented that he commented to her like, "Oh, this must feel real now after you've seen your dad on TV." And it's just like, that's quite the thing to say. You're really trying to traumatize her, right?
Yep.
And then he says it's time to go home. He said that he couldn't drop her off in the Bay Area and would take her to Huntington Beach instead. So now we're getting the backstory of what was told to us in episode 1. Now we're hearing it from Denise's mouth, and now it's starting to sound real because the way that the documentary is presented, the way that she is, she seems very credible. And so this is how we kind of find out, like, oh, this is what led up to her being released in the Huntington Beach area.
Yep.
He told her there's 2 things that you have to do. Is you can't mention that he was in the military and that they had sex. And it's like the 2, pretty much if there's anything to take away from this ordeal, it's those 2 things, right?
Yep.
Those are the 2 big details that she could relay to police, and he says you can't tell him. And he said that we will always be watching you. I think that's important for later, that we will always be watching you. He then threatened to kill her family. Let's see here. He told Denise to count to 10, and when she heard the car drive off and letting her go, that she could take the blindfold off. So she takes the blindfold off. She sees a street sign that she's familiar with, Utica, and it was familiar for when she was growing up, and she was relieved to be out of captivity. One of the strangest parts that I remember, Jack, from this is, and the law enforcement bring it up to her too, it's you had your bag with you. You had like a day bag with you. Like, it looks like you just went away for a weekend trip, and how do you get released from a kidnapper? Like, and it looks like you just got back from a trip, like, oh, like your friend just dropped you off and then you walked home a few blocks, right? Like, and so that looked strange. Like, and that was another point where I was like, man, maybe she's knows something about this, or she was involved somehow. But anyway, so she goes to her father's house, but he's not home because her father is up in Vallejo, because that's where the center of this story is. That's where she went missing from. So, like, that's kind of a weird thing to be like, oh, I'm free, but I can't even get into my dad's house, She goes to the neighbor's house. The neighbors let her in, and then they have at that point called the Huntington Beach police, and the Huntington Beach police show up to the neighbor's house. Yeah. And so at that point, her ordeal is mostly over. The police told her that they were offering her a proffer agreement, which is immunity.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that when you heard that one, Jack?
I was blown away. Blown away. Why would she need immunity for anything?
Because they just didn't believe these people, right? They just didn't.
No.
So she even says, like, immunity from what? Like, what do you think I did? And so at that point, she says she was totally lost and totally confused and hired a lawyer to help out with everything. And I think that was the right choice at that point.
It was. It was the right choice.
Get a lawyer. If nothing else, there's a barrier between you and law enforcement where they're speaking for you. The cops ask them a question, you consult, and then the lawyer answers for you. That way you can't be held like, well, maybe there was a miscommunication between the lawyer, et cetera, et cetera. It's unfortunate that you'd be kidnapped and the first thing you have to do is hire a lawyer, but maybe this is a lesson for all of us to learn. I don't know.
Well, I think it is. I mean, you have a police department. Of course, she didn't know any of this, not really, I guess, until later, but the extreme tunnel vision that had taken place in the last 40 hours or so during her ordeal about how this had really turned on its head.
And at this point they say to her, like, we're going to give you an immunity deal, and then later the cops are like, well, I don't know why she won't talk to us. What's she got to hide? Well, you offered her an immunity deal, and that scared her to get a lawyer, and now you're like, I don't know why she's not talking. Like another kind of blunder from law enforcement. They always play, it's funny because they always seem to play the victim in everything. in these cases. These when law enforcement is bad, I should say. Not all law enforcement is like that, of
Correct.
course.
That's right.
But when they are backed into a corner, they're quickly like, "Whoa, we didn't do anything wrong. You did something wrong, right?" Like they turn the. So the lawyer Rappaport, he kind of steps in and he's like, "That's it. We're done talking." I think at some point, I don't know if this is in the summary or not, but they offered to fly her in a chartered flight, and the lawyer's like, no, don't do that. I will get you on a commercial flight. And I never heard why that was. Maybe they wanted to interrogate her on the flight.
That would be my guess. They would have an officer on that flight, some detective or whatever, to then be questioning her without her lawyer there,
So then
or even recording her, privately, and she
trying to
make
find
a
her do
phone call.
something suspicious or something, right?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Which at that point, after you've been kidnapped and been held for 2 days, everything you do is going to be out of the ordinary. So as the story goes, the next day, she and her lawyer go to the Vallejo police, and they go to an interrogation room. And then there's an FBI agent by the name of David Sesma.
Mm-hmm.
David Sesma. We'll get back to him shortly, along with our favorite guy, Detective Matt Mustard, as we've started calling him Colonel Mustard. So they accuse her of lying, and the lawyer's there. She tells them that about the attacker. They seem to pretend that she's still the criminal. The detective Mustard makes a shocking statement, and he says that, haven't you seen the movie Gone Girl? I mean, I opened
and he implied this is what happened.
Could you imagine that being like, okay, I was kidnapped and I was held for ransom, and they're like,
and I was assaulted twice.
have you seen the movie? Like, what are you talking about, bro? Like, what? This is real life. This is not the movies. This is not Hollywood.
Right.
Let that be a lesson. If you ever hear anyone talking nonsense like that to you, that's when you get a lawyer, right? I mean, apparently she'd already had a lawyer at this time, but
if you didn't have one at that point, immediately, I want a lawyer now.
Yeah, it's just like the movie. It's just like the movies. Like, are you a child? Like, are you? Wow.
Do you just not want to investigate my crime, the crime that happened to me? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Instead of going to look for this woman, they just go and watch the movie Gone Girl and try to compare notes see how many similarities they could find. Is that their investigation?
Yep.
So the lawyer then replies with that. Have you seen Gone Girl? That this is what's called confirmation bias. That you've already set up this scenario in your head, and now you're just trying to find facts that support it, and you're using this Gone Girl movie as a springboard.
Yep.
Insanity.
That's right.
So they put the screws to her a little bit more, and they're like, we can put you in jail for like a year to 18 months for lying.
Well, yeah, you know mentally where that would put someone. That's just life-wrecking shit.
At this point, the real killer is somewhere between Vallejo and Huntington Beach on the highway.
That's right.
And they refuse to believe these two people. They're not following any leads.
No.
They don't have it because they've been watching Gone Girl all night.
I mean, you would think that, thinking about, I don't know. I'm sure 2015 people, had Ring cameras or at least security cameras on their houses in 2015. I know they did. So why aren't they going to the neighbors and seeing what all footage or businesses and see if they could, see Aaron's car being taken. There's a whole investigative. I mean, even if that hadn't led to much, it could have confirmed
It
some
could have confirmed the
aspects of.
story, right?
That's right.
Yeah, you could have. Well, here's the video of her, leaving the house with this guy in a mask,
Yep.
and she's got a scuba mask on. Well, that part of the story is true.
Yep.
I mean, do you pull? I mean, they had to at that point know that they had installed a camera in the house and they were watching him. Like, that's a pretty elaborate thing to do for a guy just to get away with something like, let's put a camera up and watch me. And then like, wow, like.
That's right.
Anyway, so back to episode 2. So the journalist, the one that received the first email, the proof of life email in episode 1, now he gets another email from these attackers claiming that they were responsible for Denise's kidnapping.
Yeah, because again, still in the media, they're blaming her. They're blaming Aaron. So this kidnapper's like, wait just a damn minute.
And they actually start critiquing the law enforcement, right? Like, they're like, the law enforcement needs to believe her. This is wild. Why are the kidnappers now siding with the woman they kidnapped and saying like, no, we actually did it, you need to believe her?
Right.
It's crazy, man.
And if you don't, we're going to do it again.
Wow. There's a little bit about that, about the emails, about, journalist Henry Lee. He got that, he sends that information to the law enforcement. And then the kidnappers say that they have 24 hours to issue an apology.
Crazy.
To issue an apology to Aaron and Denise, or they'll do it again, or they're going to kidnap someone else.
And I'm thinking to myself, when that happened, I'm thinking, well, the cops have the ability, or they have access to people that have the ability to trace that email.
I mean, the FBI at this point, you would think that they'd be able to. I mean,
yep.
I don't know if you can really do anything anonymously. I think if you use a VPN, like that's like, it's like, oh, it's a roadblock, but it's nothing that they can't get through. It just slows them down.
There are anonymous emailers out there. I guess if you know where to look, I don't. I just read about it. That I guess one could probably do that and get away with it, but I think you have to take some. Well, I won't say extreme measures, but certainly significant measures to make that happen.
So the end of episode
2
says that there's been another home invasion about 40 miles from Vallejo in Dublin, California. Yes, a couple's daughter is kidnapped, and the husband is fighting with the attackers. And so that's where they close out episode 2, and you're like, the cops didn't. Is it the cops' fault for not putting out the, because the kidnapper said, you need to issue an apology or this is going to happen again. Now, it didn't happen immediately again. This was June 5th, so this was a little bit down the road, but still, it happened again. And that's where the end of the episode. So, how many twists and turns have we been through in this second episode? And we didn't even get back to the FBI agent that we're going to follow along. I'm not going to spoil it for you. In episode 3, we find out more about that FBI agent. There's a little, a little seed to plant for you guys.
And maybe I'll save my reserved thoughts about that until we get into episode 3.
Okay.
I think I will.
All right. So save those reserved thoughts until episode 3. So, but give us your thoughts about this episode in general. Like, what were your overall thoughts about this one? Well,
I think that we start seeing that because there are a lot of elements that are dropped into. We were just doing the highlights, but there are a lot of elements that are dropped into episode 2. You can really begin to see this is not a hoax. They didn't plan this. They didn't make it up. And this is a real crime. And on the other side, you have this police department, Colonel Mustard and of course, the FBI agent we'll get more into in the next episode. And how whatever the thinking is in this department, how they do business, clearly the tunnel vision and blinders went up pretty quickly, and they wouldn't waver from that path at all, which is really unfortunate. Because personally, I'm just gonna go out on a limb here and just guess that not every detective and investigator in that department is that way, or so they're not going to come on camera and say, well, I would have handled things differently. They're sure as hell not going to do that, or there's going to be problems for them, I'm sure, given the fact of how this department acted and how they treated her and how they treated Aaron. It's really, really terrible. And I think most departments are, I think most departments are not like that. I think they would have done their best to investigate it and try to prove the story otherwise. And that's the exact opposite of what happened here. They began to make up their own mind very quickly because they took Aaron's clothes from him, gave him a prison outfit or a jail jumpsuit, and after not very long of being there, they really went after that kid. So
because they're trying to get a confession so they can go home early. Right?
That's right. That's all
they
about
just want
Reed.
to get it off the books, right? You bring up a really good point because, okay, from the cop's point of view, we're 99% sure that Aaron did it. But there is a 1% chance that we're traumatizing a victim right now. Like, don't you have to side on the air of caution? Even if you think he probably did it, don't you have to still be like, but if he didn't, we're traumatizing a victim. Like, just same thing with Denise. If she wasn't involved, and this is all true,
what are you doing?
By putting her through this, we're traumatizing a victim even more. And so you have to err on the side of caution when it comes to this stuff? I mean, I think you know what my answer is.
Well, of course. Well, you think about the Reed technique, and Aaron had been there. We're going back to episode 1 now. But, I think there's maybe a little bit more scattered in episode 2. And in fact, I'm pretty sure of it. But nonetheless, you remember he had been there for hours. And, Colonel Mustard comes in and basically says, you're lying. I know you're not telling the truth. You need to, and he really comes after him hard, really hard. You need to tell us where she's at and what's going on. They're trying to get a statement from this kid. They're trying to break his will. And, good for him. Good for this guy. He's a strong kid. He says, you know what? I think I need a lawyer. Because he told the story and he hadn't wavered from it at all. And he's worried about Denise. Where's she at? You guys need to be looking for her. He wasn't going to waver at all. And
I think clearly it's really an important point that when we talk about, in a bigger picture, not just this case, but when we talk about false confessions, there's a point where Aaron says, and I think it's in an interview, maybe I'll try to dig it up for the next episode, where he says, at one point, I was starting to think maybe I was schizophrenic and I did have something to do with this.
Yes, he did. Did I black out and do something that I can't remember or something? I do remember that.
If you push someone hard enough, long enough, they will start to construct stories in their own head to go, maybe I was out of my mind at that point. And so just a larger story about false, wrongful convictions is if you keep at someone long and long and long enough again, they're going to break. And that happens.
That's the whole premise with Reed, is that they're not looking for the truth. They're looking for a statement. That's because they don't have it. That's why they do it, because they have no evidence to prove you did anything. So now they resort to forcing you to make a false statement. They don't care. If you admit it, we got you. We're done. Look at Brendan. This kid's got a life sentence, and he didn't do shit except say words that they told him. Patted him back.
It's like the opposite of the scientific method, where you would collect evidence, and then you collect evidence, and then you get a statement, and then you cross-check that with the evidence. But in here, you're trying to get a statement, and then, like they said earlier, it's confirmation bias. You get a statement, and then you only collect evidence that supports that statement.
Yep.
and you
exactly
throw
what
out
it is.
everything else in the statement that doesn't work, right? You like Brendan Dassey, you said in that case. Then you disregard everything he says that doesn't fit your narrative, and you only cherry pick these important details. And he's, oh well, he said this, and that supports this evidence. Well, he said a lot of other shit that didn't support the evidence. What are you going to do with those rocks? What are you going
That's
to do
right.
with those nuggets? Oh, we just disregard that. And so it's literally the opposite of the scientific method. So any last statements on episode 2 that you want to add in, Jack, before we go?
Now, just keep in mind for everyone. I mean, this begins to really give us a lot of filler, and I can't remember with this other the second attack. I think this is for the woman detective. She's a new detective gets involved. I think it is. I think she gets introduced into the series at this point, and you got to keep her in mind because wow.
That's right. We planted a few seeds for episode 3. So
Yeah,
thanks for coming along for this episode. I'm Jeff,
I'm Jack.
and we'll see you guys on the next one.